a welcome budget turnaround, but not a long-term recovery plan. So again, we're just hawking OK Policies content here for this discussion, because they are the only, I mean, they're the only progressive think tank putting out anything that you can sink your teeth into. I mean, even a lot more than most of your news outlets. But they show what the budget looks like from historical terms. And so it is the highest dollar amount in recent years, 8.2 billion, almost 8.3. But it really doesn't tell you a good story, because in 12 years, costs have gone up. I mean, considerable amount of inflation. Even if you only have 1% of inflation, 12 years is 12%. So, I mean, your costs have all gone up. Obviously, our population has grown. You can check the census if you do not believe that. And so what you have when you control it for inflation and population growth is a very low budget. Like, our budget, state budget, is down significantly, 28% over the last 2 decades. So while this is like a little bump up from last year, which was, obviously the pandemic year, it's not even as much as it was in 2020. And again, if you take into account, like I said, population and inflation, it's down considerably from past years. And so what that means in like practical terms is that our entire state government is doing more with less. So that means you have larger class sizes, you have more kids in school, but you have like the same number of teachers, or you have, more students, more, and the same amount of course offerings. Like, we aren't like evolving or growing with the times. Like, that's one of the frustrating things about conservative arguments about budgeting is they're like, well, every year the government's bigger and bigger. And it's like, well, every year there's more and more fucking people. So like, of course it is. Like, you can't look at it in absolute terms. It's a crime against statistics.
The value of the dollar,
Right.
changes with every year. And so that's why a $15 minimum wage is no longer what we should be arguing for. So the value of the dollar changes, and so obviously that budget is going to reflect that. Now, we have
Right.
talked before about how much influx of money the state of Oklahoma has from federal aid, and other resources. So, Nick, can you elaborate on all of those different resources we now have with this year's budget?
So it's not 100% clear to me, but what I think. So last year, of course, everyone predicted like we were in the shit. Oil and gas was declining pretty rapidly going into 2020, and then of course when the pandemic hit, there was like a period of time where oil prices went negative, like in May, because demand had fallen off so much and they couldn't cut supply fast enough. Well, in the last year, obviously that's changed. Like, oil prices are back way up. We're all paying $3 a gallon for gas, so that drastically increases our budget. I think there's some coronavirus money in here, but they don't spell it out directly, so I'm a little unclear about how much of that. But like stimulus checks and extra unemployment benefits, which tens of thousands of Oklahomans took advantage of, were basically free money from the federal government that gets taxed as income, as sales tax, as rents for various things. So there's this huge influx of stimulus cash in the economy that gets spent very rapidly and goes recycles straight back into state coffers. So the state saw huge gains in income tax, in use taxes, and other taxes. So it's like they might not have gotten, or at least they didn't show it in the budget, like a big chunk of money, even though I think they are getting a big chunk of money as the state of Oklahoma to send out to agencies to do different things. But they're just flush with stimulus cash from all the rounds of stimulus and unemployment. So what that means is that the state budget's had a lot more money this year than it might otherwise have had. And so the thing is like, what did we do with that? Well, we we shoved a bunch into savings. We did fund education more. Um, you know, there's a bunch dedicated to textbooks, which is fine. I guess people are still using those. But again, our per pupil funding rate is still lagging behind other states. So it was like a little bit, and we also did things, which we'll talk about later, like funding private school vouchers and other stuff. So anyway, but the biggest chunk we did was we shoved a ton of it back into savings, which is
Like, I don't know. Some people have
fine.
savings for rainy days. Some people have savings to go to Disney World. I don't know who that is. And some people have savings for like catastrophes. So I don't know if Stitt is planning on taking the whole state of Oklahoma to Disney World or anything, but that money does not need to be in savings right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that especially savings like this, because it's not like you're building like a wealth fund like Alaska or Norway, which is like a country that's very similar size and economy similar to ours, energy producing, where they have a giant trust fund that they then pay back out to their citizens in the form of like a stipend or whatever. We're just saving it so that we can spend it when things turn down. I mean, it's just I don't know. It's not necessarily a great use of our money when we're so underfunded. And what they've really done is they've restructured the tax code, which is like to talk about some of what like is in the comments. They've also spent a huge amount of the budget on restructuring the tax code. So what they did was they cut the individual income tax rate by a fraction of a percent, 0.25%, which for the average person is nothing. I mean, if you're very low income, you don't pay hardly any income tax anyway. But even if you make $75,000 a year, you're not paying a huge amount of income tax. I mean, it's like a couple $100. So, I mean, that this will give you back. So it's just like, thanks. I mean, it's like, I guess I need $200 back on my taxes, but probably not going to change my life. I mean, and that's if I make 75,000. If you make 25,000, it's like $50. I mean, you're
Right.
getting like
I think that's the
nothing.
problem is that when you restructure these tax codes and when you do things that affect, paybacks to any way in citizens, they're like, oh, well, they're getting all of this money back. It's like you only get that much money back if you pay X amount of dollars. And so it's like, of course, if you gave someone who is in the lower income bracket an extra $500, that's them paying rent. That's them, paying for more groceries, paying for new school supplies. But if you really like shove that tax bill down and like boil it down to what these people are paying and what they're getting back, it's like, $50 really doesn't have that same effect.
And so, like, one of the good things that they did do is kind of a bone to progressively minded tax people is that they did reinstate the earned income tax credit refundability. There's some of us on the left that aren't always wild about EITC just because it's complicated. You have to be a tax filer. It has lots of weird cliffs and valleys and stuff, so it misses a lot of people that really need help, but it's still really good for low-wage earners. So they did add that back in. So that'll cost the state quite a bit. But I say quite a bit. I'm trying to see what the exact amount was for the ITC. But the big things were the income tax cut, which overwhelmingly benefits high income earners. And then they also cut the corporate income tax cut by 2%. So all this is doing is like, so this year when we're flush with stimulus cash and all this other stuff, we're basically paying to shift the tax code in future years off the wealthy and onto the rest of us. Because that's what will happen is if we want to keep the same level of services, now corporations are paying 2% less. Now high income earners are paying 0.25% less. And so we either have to make those up in cuts to services or or taxes on lower income people.